Okay, welcome grade 8s to the final section in the chapter and in the course. 8.4 to 8.6 we deal with different transformations and then how they relate to tessellations. So we'll look in 8.4 at identifying transformations, so a little bit of review from grade 7 and grade 6, I believe, some of the main transformations. Okay, so we'll use this example here. Here's kind of this pattern using these L shapes, and so we can identify the three main transformations: translations, rotations, and reflections. And we can identify one of each here, and then we'll get into a closer example of each of those. So if I'm starting with my shaded in shape here, a pretty straightforward transformation would be a translation. Translation, another way you might have been taught, is just sliding something over. You're translating it over. So from this shape to the shape A, we're actually just moving this 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's being translated 4 to the right. Okay, so those ones usually are the easiest ones, translations. We can also recognize a reflection here. If I imagine here's a line of reflection, this shape can be reflected to give me shape B. And actually shape C could also be reflected along a diagonal line. Okay, so it's translation, reflection, and then rotation. That's kind of usually the trickier ones is the rotations. You have to kind of visualize, especially if you don't have these things in front of you, you're just looking at a paper, you can't physically rotate it. So you have to imagine, if I would take this as the rotation point, rotate it about 90 degrees, rotate it another 90 degrees, this C could be rotated. Okay, D is actually also a rotation around this point where we move the whole shape, move it again 180 degrees. So we'll look at a little bit, or a little closer at some of these examples. So translation. Okay, here's an example from your book. You can follow along. If I take this shape and I translate it over, the only tricky part is just being able to count. So if I take this corner point, 1, 2, 3, it's not a translation of 3 because I'm not at that same corner point. So I have to keep counting 4, 5, 6. So this is a translation 6 units to the left. Okay. A reflection, you can reflect, usually the reflections we see are on a vertical or a horizontal line. So if I'm taking this shape, I can actually reflect it and it's going to mirror what the shape looked like over here. C is a reflection across the vertical line there. So you can see that, take a look at it in your book as well. The last one, the trickier one, would be rotations. Depending on the point, this one tells you where the point of rotation is. If I take that shape and I start rotating it, this is a quarter turn or 90 degrees, and then another 90 degrees or quarter turn. You can see how now if I look at this shape, it looks like where D is, so it's a 180 degree rotation around that point. Okay, so we'll just look at a couple examples here, and you have some work that you can practice. Okay, so here's a design of a bunch of squares. Describe each transformation. A translation, so sliding it over, where square R is an image of square B. So that means we're starting with B and we're getting to R. So again, if I take a point, doesn't matter which one you take, but if I take this point, I need to move this 2 over and 2 up. So we would, how do we describe that? We would say it's a translation of 2 to the right and 2 up, and you can just use the short form R and L and U and D when you're making a translation. Okay, a reflection for which square R is an image of square B, so you would have to reflect somehow, so it should be fairly obvious that you're reflecting along a diagonal line. Notice in any reflection, if this is kind of half a square away from the reflection line, so should this one be. This is a full diagonal square, then it should be a full diagonal square to get to the same point on the other side, and that should be true for all parts of the shape. Okay, so it's along the diagonal line there in B. Okay, so that's a translation and a reflection. Example 2 gets us to look at rotations. These are usually the trickier ones, so I'll actually rotate these shapes so you can hopefully get a bit of a visual here. So here's the main shape. We want to identify a rotation for which triangle D is an image of C. So we can imagine this is our initial shape. Okay, the C here is our initial shape. So how do I need to rotate if I want to get that next shape back? Well, if I take this as my rotation point, that's the only way it's going to work. I'm basically just rotating. Some of you will be able to visualize, yeah, that's a quarter turn. Otherwise, it might be helpful just to be able to look at it like this. If I take that C shape, notice what it does. If I take a quarter turn, so I've rotated that 90 degrees, now look at where my C shape is. It looks like it does over here. Okay, so it's a 90 degrees, and we're going along with the clock. You maybe can still read a clock. That's not digital, but it's going along with the numbers on the clock, so it's 90 degrees clockwise. Okay. B, a rotation for which triangle F is the image of E. So now we're looking at these two. A little bit trickier one because these two shapes are so far apart, but we kind of have to find where is the middle point, where's that point of rotation. So for us, we're going to be rotating along this point, and so I've kind of taken that off, and you'll notice that if I start rotating this shape, it's actually rotating around the middle of the shape. So here's 90 degrees and then 180. So you'll see that that's rotated. Now if I look at the E shape, it looks just like the F one is, and the F looks exactly like the E. So it's been rotated 180 degrees around that point. Here, the other point, the point of rotation was there. Usually it's easier to rotate when you are rotating right along the shape because then it doesn't move too much, right? So that's an example of all three different types of transformations that you will see in tessellations, as we'll look at in the next few sections. We've got a couple questions to practice here from page 460.